Chapter 2. Frances Mary Kelly rode on the front seat of the Mueller's wagon next to Johnny. Hot July air from the Kansas prairie, fragrant with a sharp scent of newly cut grasses and freshly turned earth, swirled around them. Plowed ridges lay to the right, grazing land to the left. In the distance, a snaking line of scrubby trees marked the presence of a stream, and close to the stream stood a house. The door opened and Frances caught a flash of blue. She knew the woman who wore the blue dress, Elvira Reading. "Elmer, come right this minute." The high and low tones of the woman's voice carried through the stillness, as did the voice of the child who answered, "Coming, Ma." Frances held a hand to her chest, pressed against the growing ache. "This is what I want for Johnny and me," she thought. "Marriage, a home, children. Why can't it be?" She slid a little closer to Johnny on the wagon seat, glancing at his broad shoulders, at the way his sun-bleached hair curled under the snug leather band of his hat, and at his hands firm on the reins. Frances had met Johnny on the day the Cummingses had arrived to Kansas. The Mueller family, along with their near neighbors, had come to share the Cummingses' joy, having adopted 2 orphan train children. And the night, while she thought of the other children were sleeping, all of them on pallets in front of the fireplace, Frances had given in to the desperate loneliness for her mother and brothers and sisters and cried. Johnny had been awake when he had heard her, but he hadn't teased. Keeping his voice low so as not to wake the others, he whispered, "Ma said you have to leave your other brothers and sisters. If I had to leave Matt and Carl and even old Froggy Fred over there, I'd cry too." Maybe, just maybe, Frances thought. She had begun to fall in love with Johnny's good humor and kindness and understanding at that moment. Aware of her gaze, Johnny looked down at Frances. Their eyes met. "I see the Reddings have finished their new house," Frances said. "They've moved out of the soddy." Johnny looked back at the road without answering, but Frances plunged on. "Elvira worked on the house for her husband. She could pound a nail and use a saw as well as Harry could. Elvira told me that." "Harry didn't serve in the army," Johnny said. "He wasn't in a Confederate prison." "What's that got to do with—" "He wasn't injured. He wasn't starved. He's perfectly fit for a man's work. Yet he chooses to accept a woman's help. Not something I would do." Frances choked down the anger that rose in her throat and slid a little further away from Johnny. Perhaps Harry sees his husband and wife as a team, willing to work together at whatever job needs to be done. Perhaps he isn't as stubborn as you. The words were out before she could stop it. "You think I'm stubborn, do you?" Johnny gave a quick flick of the reins, and the plodding horses picked up their pace. "Frances, I know it's hard for you to understand, but it was a stubbornness, as you put it, that kept me alive in the Confederate prison. I refused to give in to the maggots crawling through the food, to the freezing rain that soaked to the bone, to the stench of the illness and death around me. I refused to give up and die with so many members of my company." He hesitated. "You have to stop feeling guilty about the deaths," Frances said. "You were not to blame. Your company was outnumbered and captured. But my friends died, and I was spared. Why? Tell me why." Before she could speak, he shook his head and said, "I've searched for an answer. There is none." Frances took a long, steady breath. "I know it was hard, Johnny. I prayed for you. I ached for you. I cried for you. When you came home and to your parents, I did everything I could to help you." "I know. I'm grateful," Johnny said. He took Frances's hand and held it. "I understand I couldn't have survived without you." Frances was determined to continue. "That horrible time in your life's over now, Johnny. Your body's healing, yet you refuse to put your year in prison out of mind." Tears burned to her eyes as she remembered Johnny's raised smile and eager laughter, which she'd rarely seen or heard since his return. "It's impossible to put out of my mind. I'll never forget. Never." "Please don't dwell on the past," Frances said. "Look forward. Think of the happiness that lies ahead. Think of the happiness we can share." Johnny sighed, and for a moment his broad shoulders sagged. "Sorry, Frances. I don't want to talk about marriage. It's not time to even think of marriage." Her spine stiffened and she flung her words at him. "Why? Because you didn't come back from the war the same as you left home? Do you think that would make me love you any less?" Rising on the horizon ahead of them, Frances could see the row of 1- and 2-story wooden buildings that made up the town of Maxville. Could she convince Johnny before they arrived? "You don't understand," Johnny mumbled. "I do understand." For a moment Johnny's face softened as he turned to her. "Frances, someday you and I, and our children—" "Someday?" Frances asked. "Why not now?" She raised one hand, reaching out to him, but Johnny's jaw clenched and closed. Stubborn look came into his eyes again. "Not till I'm able to work my land again without help. We can work together. I will not have my wife add to her chores by having to do my job." Frustration turned her anger as Frances blurted out, "Wife? What wife? If you insist on waiting everything in the whole world to be perfect, you'll never have a wife." Johnny groaned. "Frances, why are you doing this to us?" "Me? You're blaming me?" "Of course I'm blaming you. If you could just try to be patient." Furious at Johnny, and in the Irish temper that got the best of her, Frances snapped, "I'm sorry, but I'm fresh out of patience. You either love me as I am, the way I love you, or look for a suitable wife." "Frances, there's nothing more to say." Choking back tears, Frances turned away from him. As soon as they reached the main street of Maxville and Johnny pulled the horses up beside the uneven wooden sidewalk, Frances jumped down out of the wagon. Buy the supplies you need, but leave them with Mr. Nash. When I've finished my business at the bank, I'll come to the general store and load him into the wagon, Johnny told her. Frances didn't answer. Silently fuming, she strode to the side on the sidewalk toward the general store. Ahead near the store's entrance, she saw Mrs. Garrett and Mrs. St. John, two of the liveliest gossips in the area. They had to have noted her arrival in town with Johnny. Frances realized her cheeks were flushed and hot. Her breathing was rapid. She couldn't greet the woman with the angry smoke pouring out of her ears. Who knew what wild rumors they might start? Frances stopped outside the meeting hall, trying to calm down while she pretended to be very much interested in the poster outside the open doorway. And as she read the words on the poster, she sucked in her breath. Come today. Meet the children from New York City in need of homes. There was more, but Frances's eyes were immediately caught by the last line on the poster. Andrew McNair, agent. Andrew, she whispered. She picked up her skirts and flew down up the steps into the nearly empty meeting hall. Andrew, she cried, rushing into the arms of a tall, muscular man who grinned at her with delight. The words tumbled out. There's so much to ask, Frances said. How is Catherine? I'm so glad I was able to come to your wedding. She was a beautiful bride. And you, Andrew, you're looking well. Have you seen Ma lately? Since Danny's death, the heart seems to have gone out of her. Her letters. She stopped suddenly. I'm babbling, aren't I? But there's so much to say. Placing his hands on Frances's shoulders, Andrew answered, Catherine's fine. So is your mother. Now tell me, how's Frances, Mary Kelly, and Johnny? Did he come to town with you? Frances shrugged and tried to smile again. She didn't want Andrew, or anyone else, to discover how hurt and angry Johnny had made her. Johnny's health's improving rapidly, she said. As for me, school's out for the next 2 months. I've been allowed to remain living in the teacher's house. I plan to study, tutor a few students, hire out to some of the farm wives for summer chores. Andrew's smile broadened. Then you're not committed to something that you can't leave for a while? It was just as I had hoped. Would there be any problems if you were out of town for a few weeks? Out of town? Where? I was going to call on you this afternoon, Andrew said. I have a favor to ask of you. A favor that would send me away from Maxville? Frances smiled. Don't be so mysterious, Andrew. Tell me what the favor is. It's a boy. His name is Stephen Gromesh. Andrew turning called. Stephen, will you come here, please? I have someone I want you to meet. From the shadows at the corner of the room stepped a scrawny boy, about 10 years old. His cap pulled low over his ragged haircut. The suit that had been given seemed a size too large. Hello, Stephen, Frances said. She held out her hand. Stephen shook her hand and smiled. I'm going home, he said. Home? Frances looked at Andrew for an explanation. Stephen's parents died. He was brought to the Children's Aid Society, Andrew said. And after he left with us on the train, an aunt and uncle came to the society's office. They had just arrived in the United States, and they asked us to return Stephen to them. Good. He'll have a family, Frances answered. She well remembered the fear, heartache, and uncertainty she had felt as an orphan train rider. She had traveled with her brothers and sisters on the orphan train 6 years ago, but it seemed as though it had happened yesterday. Now you'll be going back to New York City with Andrew. She told Stephen to join your aunt and uncle. Stephen beamed and Andrew spoke up. Not exactly, he said. This is the favor I want to ask you, Frances. I have business dealings that must be taken care of. I have no choice. Would it be possible for you to escort Stephen to New York? Flustered, Frances said. Oh, no, I couldn't. Please, Frances, think about it. School's out. You don't have children to teach for the next few weeks. Andrew reached into the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out 2 train tickets. I have duties, Frances said. Granted, they're not urgent, but even so, how long do I have to decide? I need to know today. If you can't help me out, I have to find someone else. Andrew held up the tickets and said, the train leaves tomorrow. Your ticket's round trip. You'll spend 2 nights under the care of Miss Claudine Hunter, who works at the Society's office, and return to Kansas. And just think, you'll have enough time to see some of New York City again. Frances's heart gave a thump. New York City. The very name gave her the feel of being 13 years old again. Suddenly, every facet of the city came vividly alive in her memory. She could almost see the bustle of people, hear the shouts of the drivers from the crowded cabs and wagons, smell the salt air and the horse droppings and the over-perfumed ladies on the avenue, and she could feel the warmth of the one-room house in which the Kellys had lived. Sometimes they had been a little hungry, sometimes a little cold, but the strength and comfort of their love had overcome most of their troubles. A deep longing swept through Frances. She ached to see once more the room where she'd happily sown piecework with Ma, where Da had been a strong, laughing father before he sickened and died, where Mike and Danny had played and wrestled, where Megan, loving Megan, had cared for little Peg and Danny. She could hear Da's laughter and Mike's banter. She could see Peg twirling on one foot and demanding, "Dance with me, Frances." She closed her eyes as the memory swirled in her mind, pulling at her, tugging at her, begging at her to come. Frances had never imagined she'd see New York City again, but Andrew was offering her the chance to go. I want to go, she thought. I have to go. But if she went to New York City and back, she'd be away from Johnny nearly 3 weeks. She couldn't do it. Frances, if I could have your answer by, let's say, noon, Andrew said. I'd be away from the wall of bitterness Johnny is building around himself, Frances thought. I'd have time to think about what I want to do with my life. If Johnny doesn't want me, maybe this is what was meant, so that I'd have a good sense to plan a future without Johnny in it. Shaken, she raised her eyes to Andrew's. "I can give you an answer now," she said. "I'll take Stephen back to New York."